Hello everyone and welcome to Demystifying the Publishing Process, a Cape graphic novels panel for Thought Bubble Digital Comic Con 2020. My name is Matt Lune from shelfdust.com and I'm joined today by a bevy of guests from Cape Graphic Novels, part of the Jonathan Cape imprint for Vintage at Penguin Random House, and from the RCW Literary Agency. Before we begin, let's go around and everyone introduce themselves, and we'll start with you, Katrina.
So I'm Katrina. I work on the marketing team at Vintage, and one of my marketing focus areas is the Cape graphic novels list. And in publishing marketing, traditionally look after the paid side of promotion, whether it's advertising or promotional items, and just getting word about the book out into the public sphere.
Brilliant. And yourself, Daisy?
Hi everyone, I'm Daisy. I work in the Cape editorial team. So part of my job is reading manuscript submissions and discussing them with the rest of the team to help decide what gets published. Also part of my role is drafting the copy that you find on the back cover of a book, and really being a general point of contact for authors and agents, making sure you get paid on time, and answering any other questions you might have, and just promoting your book to anyone who will listen to me.
And yourself, Sam?
Hello, I am a literary agent at Rogers Coleridge and White, and I've been there about, most of my life. And I'm also an author as well, children's author. What else can I tell you? I was shortlisted for Agent of the Year and failed to win it last year. I'm not bitter. And I represent a very, very wide gamut of authors, whatever a gamut is, never really sure. That's me.
And you, Matthew?
Yeah, so my name's Matthew. I am the writer and artist behind a graphic novel called Flake, which came out earlier this year. It's my first graphic novel, having been sort of scratching around with small press stuff for a number of years.
And last but not least, Neil.
Hi, I'm Neil. I'm the production director for Jonathan Cape, and I've been at Cape for more years than I'm prepared to state. I have had the privilege, however, though, of producing almost every graphic novel that Jonathan Cape have published, and probably before they were called graphic novels as well. So it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Brilliant. Well, welcome everyone. We'll start with you then, Katrina. What do you see as the aims of the panel today?
We wanted to do this to help demystify the publishing process for any aspiring creators, anyone in the industry who is thinking about traditional publishing, and also just for readers to make Cape more accessible to a wider audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the whole process really, like you pick up a book in comic book shops or graphic novels in bookstores, and you'd have no real idea of everything that goes on, because there's just potentially one name on the front, and the company logo, but that's it. So we've had a few fan questions. You put some questions out to the public over on your Instagram, and one of them was just asking who are the other people involved in publishing, and we've answered that question a little bit with the people that we have here, but just how many people are involved in producing a graphic novel?
Many people. Some, not everyone, but you can work with an agent who will then send out the book to publishers, and they'll kind of also perform the role of editor a little bit in the early stages. But then aside from editorial, there's production, who make sure the book prints and looks good, and design, who will help art direct if need be, sales, who will help get the book into bookshops, and then it comes to marketing and publicity, who help get the word out.
Is there anything different about graphic novels compared to standard published novels, prose?
I think maybe Neil could speak a bit to this, just because I imagine the process for getting the artwork resolution and printing right is probably a bit more complex.
Yeah, I would say that the fundamental difference is the physicality of the book. If I can get early visibility of the material and the opportunity to sit down and talk to the artist about how they visualize their product, it helps me so much to make the right decisions about how we should proceed with the production process. And every individual graphic novel is pretty much unique. I've never known any of our artists to write to a particular formula, i.e. there's a space on the wall, can you put me a painting in there that fits that space? Everything comes through in a relatively bespoke fashion. And it's a challenge to transfer their thoughts and their vision into something that gets put on paper. And there's always some degree, compromise is the wrong word, it's a transition. What you see on a screen is not necessarily what you see on a book, it's a different interpretation. And hopefully, as Matthew and I think did successfully with the wonderful book Flake, the opportunity to meet at the earliest stage really proved beneficial from everyone's perspective.
Mm-hmm. So we'll touch on the actual process that you're talking about a little more later on. But if we go right back to the beginning of the graphic novel process, then Daisy, that's where you come in, isn't it? Because when you're looking at acquisitions and submissions that people bring to yourself, what are the kind of things that you're looking for at Jonathan Cape?
Well, first of all, I'd say probably the first editorial process actually happens in the literary agency. So maybe Sam can talk about that in a bit, because the agent is, the first editor who does loads of work with the author before we even get to see it. But in terms of what kind of submissions we're looking for at Cape, our remit is quite wide. We look for fiction and non-fiction, funny graphic novels, fantasy stories. We publish quite a lot of graphic memoirs and graphic journalistic reportage. I think the only genre we wouldn't be interested in is erotica, if I'm honest, with no disrespect to the very talented erotica creators out there. But we keep an open mind. And the only other rule I'd say is that the books that we publish at Cape tend to be at least sort of 80 pages long. Anything shorter than that, we can't really deal with. But if we receive a submission that's shorter than that and we really like it, then we would encourage the artist to expand on it and then resubmit it when it's the right length.
Okay, well, interestingly enough, this aspect of the publishing process was the one that we got some of the most questions about, understandably so, because people, if they have ideas, they want to know where they go with them, what happens to their ideas when they land on your desk. So can you walk us through what the submission process is like? Well,
ordinarily we prefer to receive submissions by post. At the moment, most of us are working from home, so it's a little bit different right now. And if artists out there would like to submit to us, I'd recommend they get in touch with us on social media in the first instance, so we can decide what the best way to receive the submission is. You can find us on Instagram at Cape Graphic Novels, also on Twitter at Jonathan Cape. But once we've actually received the submission, it normally lands on either my desk first or our publishing director Mihal's desk. And we also work with Dan Franklin, who used to be our main publisher of graphic novels, and now he's largely retired, but is still working with us as a consultant and graphic novels expert. So we tend to all read the material. Also, Katrina tends to read the material very early on as well. And we discuss it as a group. And if we decide to move forward with it, we would then share it even more widely with people in our sales team, senior leadership, marketing, publicity, absolutely everybody. And we have an acquisitions meeting once a week where we all discuss the projects that we want to make an offer on.
That's quite a lot of eyes on a book, isn't it? In the early stages, everyone's getting a look, everyone's getting an idea for what that work is. And we had another question asking, is there an open submission period for graphic novels at Cape?
We don't have an open submission period. We do accept submissions all year round, but we do always recommend getting an agent and submitting via an agent if possible, because yeah, it's just helpful to have an agent, as Sam will be able to explain later.
Yeah, well, we'll move on to you as well then, Sam, in that case, because you know, one of the questions that both yourself and Daisy can answer really is how complete do kind of manuscripts or sample pages or a work that has been produced, what are you kind of looking for in able to have more of a successful pitch to publishers?
Well, basically, you don't need the full thing, but we would need a good 20 pages and a good idea of where it was going to go from there. But one thing I need to stress very early on about, you know, this whole demystifying graphic novels is that it really is, it's very tough for graphic novelists. It really is very tough. It's a very tough market to break. And it's because it's a real labor of love, I think, from everybody in publishing. There are not very many agents who look at graphic novels, who know anything about graphic novels. Equally, there are not many publishers, traditional publishers, who do graphic novels. I can count the fingers of one hand, really. So it's not easy. So you really need to be sort of very dedicated. And as Matthew said, you know, maybe work with smaller presses first. But once you have a real quality, you know, a quality product behind you, then 20 pages, it's just something that we can see the art, we can see that you can tell the story, and we can see where it's going.
Are you looking for more the quality of the creator coming through more than the actual polish of the work itself? Are you looking for kind of, you know, are you thinking, well, raw talent potentially, or at least that, you know, what they're showing you is something viable rather than, you know, as you say, rather than a complete work in that case?
I mean, to an extent, yes, but we need to be able to see that, okay, raw talent is one thing, but they need to be able to tell a story. They need to be able to have the artwork, and often I also deal with children's books as well, and sometimes I get picture books, and same with picture books and graphic novels. Sometimes you can just tell the seriousness of the art, the seriousness of the creator is the quality of the work. And sometimes I get things which are very, very sort of sub quality because they've clearly not looked at a graphic novel in the last 20 years. I think most graphic novels are things of beauty, whether it's a simplistic type of beauty, but they are things of beauty. So anyway, yeah.
And what about you, Daisy? What kind of things are you looking for? You and, you know, the general you of Jonathan Cape. What things stand out to you when receiving submissions or when you're looking at other people's work?
I don't like to be prescriptive about this because I like to be surprised by a submission. But anything that seems like an original story, something that really makes me laugh, or something that just makes you go, wow, when you look at the page, something with real creative and artistic flair and an inventive, interesting use of the art that maybe I haven't seen before. Those are all kind of big ticks for me. Yeah.
And to, you know, to your point and to what Sam was saying, you know, the panel of demystifying the publishing process, I don't think any of us here think that this is a you know, 10 cheap and quick ways to get your book published. Although that would be, you know, good clickbait, and I'm sure many people would look at this more if we were like, OMG, this is how you do it, you know.
If only I knew. If only I knew what those 10 easy ways were.
But let's talk to you then, Matthew, as someone who has had success with Jonathan Cape and have had your debut graphic novel Flake, which is being published now. What was your journey like? You know, tell us about your experience of the publishing process.
Well, I guess mine would be was not unique. I don't know whether it would be a little unusual in that I think one of the big reasons that Cape would have looked at my stuff is that I'd won the Observer Cape Comic Short Story Prize in 2016. Now, I know there's a few people who've done books with Cape subsequently having won that. So that, I think, it's like that's a good sort of foot in the door. I think it sort of draws some attention And so I felt like, I guess I had a sort of a window after winning that was in 2016, to sort of take advantage of that whilst I had Cape's attention. And so, yeah, I think I'd probably submitted an idea with, you know, some pages and so on, probably I would say the following April, May. So in the following sort of 6 months or so. And then having submitted it, I think would have been, yeah, in a month or so after that, it was accepted. And then, yeah, that process then was sort of, okay, Matthew, get on with it. We like your idea, you know. Yeah, I should say also that having won the Cape Observer Prize, Sam contacted me and said, oh, you know, would you be interested in being represented? That helps. That I think that's a sort of
winning the biggest prize in the country for graphic novels does tend to help.
Yeah, yeah. But that I think, again, that sort of legitimizes it in a way. I think it sort of gave me a bit more momentum as well. And yeah, so it all happened, I felt, quite quickly afterwards, actually, after winning the Cape Prize.
What was the relationship like between yourself and Sam? Like, I understand that he is sat there, so you know your answer may be, you know, I can always, like, you know, shove him to the side for a little bit. But no, you know,
leave the room if you like.
That's it. Well, just cover your ears for a minute, yeah.
And then I mean, I met Sam a few times before submitted the thing that became Flake, or the beginning of it, and it was useful just to speak to someone about what ideas I had, because I think the first thing I suggested to Sam was essentially a series of short stories. And I think Sam looked at me and said, well, you know, it might be a good idea, but maybe not, and sort of perhaps gently steered me away from that idea to what Flake came. So I think from my recollection, I described the opening scene of Flake, which is the hero Howard stood on the top of an ice cream van as the tide comes in, and Sam latched onto that really quickly, and I thought, okay, that's and that's really what it sort of grew from. So yeah, that helped. It's just another pair of eyes and ears, I think, which is helpful, certainly at the beginning.
And how much of an understanding of this whole publishing process did you have before going into this?
I would say very little at all, to be honest. It was, I wouldn't say a difficult process, or at least I think I'd forgotten all of the meltdowns and so actually it seemed to all happen pretty quickly, from submitting the idea to it starting. And then I think then dealing with Cape, it was a question of that if I had any questions, they were happy to respond, you know.
Yeah.
So they were there for help, but it wasn't I didn't have a sense that I wasn't harangued or harassed to see where I was in the process. I think after about 50 pages, I'd sent in what I'd done so far, just to say, oh, you know, is this okay?
I'd like to take the opportunity to harangue and harass you about your new ideas.
Yes.
Escape.
Yeah.
Well, that's it, of course, isn't it? You know, it's onto the next one now, I assume, or at least that's how much Sam would want you to be moving forward.
Yeah, I need to do that. It's funny, the pandemic, having more time, you would think, has sort of seemed to have killed people's creative urges. I don't know. I've spoken to friends of mine who are in similar position. They're like, yeah, it's strange. You would think it would be a real catalyst, but it's had this sort of like a numbing effect.
It is a very difficult time. I mean, obviously, if things were different, we'd all be sat in the same room, having this conversation, apart from, you know, instead of over Zoom instead. But yeah, it is strange. And you know, Katrina, Daisy, is that something that you've experienced when it comes to you know, your standard day to day? Is this something that has affected you guys as well?
Yeah, I think it's different. Like, it's very different coming up with ideas for things when you're in isolation and you don't have people in the room to bounce things off. So that's something we've had to adapt to in marketing, for sure. And yeah, I really felt for Matthew because his debut came out literally like a couple of weeks after lockdown, all the shops shut. But he's had some prize wins since then. And yeah, it looks like Flake is gonna keep going, and lots of really good reviews as well. So it's exciting to see what comes next. But yeah, I think we've had experience of everyone being a bit kind of numbed and not deflated, but it is hard when something like this is going on in the background and you don't know what the market's going to look like, or bookshops struggling, and we've had to move into a digital space more, but we still want to support comic and bookshops as much as we can.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I suppose the biggest challenge right at the start was actually getting copies of our own books in our houses, because initially we couldn't send ourselves free copies. And our warehouse staff obviously are having to work with smaller numbers at the moment, so they're focusing on getting books into bookshops and selling authors' copies so they can generate royalties. So getting copies of the books we love in our houses has probably been one of the most difficult things, but it's getting better slowly, and hopefully, yeah, we'll stick together and pull through it.
Brilliant. Well, let's go back to Flake then, and so, you know, Matthew, you talked about your relationship with Sam as an agent, and you talked briefly about your relationship with Cape Graphic Novels team. But for yourselves, Sam and Daisy, how, you know, what is that submissions process like? You know, what was it like working with creators at these early stages? You know, regardless of, you know, some, as Matthew said, he had some knowledge but very little knowledge. So there's a lot of guidance that has to go on, I imagine, from yourselves.
Yeah, as I say, I work across all types of books, graphic novels, children's literary fiction, crime, everything. And every author needs different levels of guidance. Every author needs different levels of hand-holding. So you have to assess what the needs are of each individual client. But, you know, we work together with the publishers, and most of the time the authors are happy.
And what about yourself, Daisy? What's it like from your side to have to kind of work with, how directly do you work with the creators themselves?
I like to think I work with creators as directly as they like. I basically introduce myself at the start as a point of contact, and I'm here for some creators choose to email me often, others less often, and I sort of just try to meet their needs and make sure that the process is as easy and understandable as possible as we go. Yeah.
We'll come to you then, Neil, because we're talking now about the physical production of the book, and you mentioned earlier about the fact that, you know, the physicality of it is important, and that's, you know, that's even more important now than ever, really, isn't it? Because we mentioned earlier about how difficulty getting physical copies in people's homes, and, you know, digital just isn't really the same, is it, as having like an actual physical book?
I couldn't agree with you more. The EPUB process is another way of selling the book, and it may be preferred by some people, but from my own point of view, and I suspect from every graphic novelist's viewpoint out there, they want to see this book exist in a physical form. And I go back to a point that Sam made earlier. I want this book to be beautiful, and I'm sure they do as well. And you wander into a specialist bookshop like Gosh and just see the variety of the product in there, the different formats, the different treatments, the different content. I think it's an incredibly exciting mode of publishing. And from a production point of view, it gives me more satisfaction than most other books that I do, because I have much more contact with the creator, with the author, with the artist, than I do with almost anything else that I do, short of perhaps photography work. So that opportunity to sit down and talk with them at the outset about how they visualize their product, how we decide upon a format. I mentioned earlier, you know, practically every graphic novel that I produce is different. You know, you can have colossal things like Quimby the mouse here, which, you know, is floor-splittingly enormous, to very well established formats such as this book that we did with Nick Hayes, Rime of the Modern Mariner. And to have that visibility at the earliest outset, and to be able to access the files, just a few sample images here and there, gives me the opportunity, as I did with Matthew, to generate some proofs just for his reaction and approval and comment, so that we embark upon it as a much more collaborative process. It's also important from the novelist's viewpoint that they present the files in the right way, and that means understanding that the text needs to be established as a separate level. So we have the opportunity to sell these books to co-edition publishers, who will therefore, you know, shove a translation in on that black plate level. They need to understand that the page extent of a book is defined because of the way that printing presses work, and we print predominantly in 16s and 32s. So the book has to be an even number of 16s or 32s in order for it to be cost effective and adaptable to printing processes. That extent needs to include the prelims of the book, which people seldom ever look at, but are physically part of the printing process. But it doesn't include the end papers of the book. So when Matthew set up Flake, this element here, the end paper, is a separate file. If you include that within the main extent of the book, then that creates confusion. We talk about the allowance for bleeds, because if you have an image on the page, when you trim the book, you will lose 3 millimeters all the way around. Just things that you need to be aware of at the outset, so they don't become problems further on down the line and result in perhaps a compromise that everyone's unhappy with, or even an error that would creep in within the book. There's also the opportunity to look at how playful we can be with graphic novels. And I can't remember many books that we actually do gatefolds on any longer, but with another Nick Hayes title here, we had the opportunity to do that. So that needs to be thought out at the beginning. The binding style, whether it's a cased book, how we treat the jacket. Most graphic novels don't tend to have a physically separate jacket. They have something called a PLC, a paper laminated case. So it's actually bonded onto the case itself. And it seems to be more in style with this process, this style of publishing. I can point to some recent experiences with Stephen Appleby when we published Dragman. And we spend a lot of time at the outset looking at the way that he visualized the book. I took him to, the printer happened to have a London office where there was a very extensive library of other publishers' graphic novels in addition to our own. And we were able to look at sort of techniques and processes that appealed to him. And as I said at the outset, it's one of the few opportunities I have as a production person to have a much greater involvement with the artist.
Mm. Well, talking specifically about Flake, then, how did you and Matthew come up with the decisions that you made regarding that production? Because, as you say, there's so many different types of graphic novels. There's so many different sizes and styles, as you've just talked about. What was some of the early conversations you had? What was that like between the two of you to reach the decisions you made? What was in the best interest of the story?
Well, I needed to know from Matthew very fundamental things like, did he imagine his book to be printed on a white paper or a cream paper? Did that necessarily complement the style of his artwork? Would it be a coated paper stock or an uncoated paper stock? It may be something of a generalization, but most graphic novels tend to be printed on uncoated papers. It tends to suit the style of the artwork, but it's not universally true. So I needed that degree of input. So the opportunity to sit down with Matthew, to have some sample files, to look at the proofs at the outset, to get his feedback was absolutely critical. Would you agree on that, Matthew?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember coming into Cape's offices to look at paper and stuff, and I think might have been the most exciting part of the whole process. And I was really pleased, actually. I think Neil was able to steer me in the right direction, like sort of describing what I wanted, and was able to say, well, I think, you know, this is the best way to go. And so when I think I got sent through then what would have been pages printed on the stock that we eventually went with, they were exactly how I think I'd imagined them in my mind's eye. So yeah, I think that's reassuring. I think having someone who obviously has, you know, a good deal of experience and knowledge about these things, and, you know, my sort of ham-fisted attempts to describe what I want it to look like. Yeah, I think Neil was able to nail that.
I have to say that Matthew was something of a dream of an author, because everything was there. He was well ahead of the game, and he understood that the schedule that we were working to enabled us to print in the Far East, which is obviously of attraction from everyone's particular point of view. It's not simply on a cost basis. If these suppliers couldn't produce the product in the way that we wanted it to be done, then we wouldn't be using them. But obviously there is an expertise there. There's a variety of treatments that we can bring that enable us to produce the books in the most attractive way possible. And of course, if you're printing in China, then you have to expect that there will be associated schedule elements that mean that you need to establish particular deadlines as early as possible. You know, it's 6 weeks shipping. It's probably in the region of 4 to 6 weeks manufacturing time. And we always try and get our books into the warehouse about 6 weeks ahead of publication date, so marketing and publicity can get the books out there for comment and review. But with graphic novels in particular, I've always attempted to at least attempted to try and get early copies produced. So the ability to communicate the content of the book is there in your hands rather than just an image on the screen. And I think that really does make a great deal of difference. And because Matthew was very, very well organized about this, we had really early copies. And so we were able to get those out and really assist the other departments who were involved in the publishing process to get the best out of the book.
Well, that brings us on to you then, Katrina. What are the next stages? What are the next steps for yourself as a publisher in getting that book out there to people?
So I work very closely with our publicity team, and we tend to do advanced mailings to our press and media contacts, and any people on social media who are really engaged about shouting about new books and creators. So my marketing avenues, I also work closely with retailers. A lot of them like to do exclusives because a lot of comic readers are also collectors. Signed prints and things like that go down really well. Something kind of covetable and special that's extra to the book. So we do that a lot with foils and Gosh. And yeah, at the moment, marketing is mostly kind of online. So I'll look at social advertising where it's appropriate and creating designed imagery to really push the book as a physical object as well. Photography, I think, is really important, so you can see the design and the structure of the book. For something like Chris Ware's Rusty Brown, it was a really incredible object that kind of had to be seen. So many different like elements to the jacket that could come off, and it worked in 4 different ways or something. It was yeah, just ways that you can showcase how unique and incredible the design and production of the book is as well. And I also think it's really nice to have those moments where you can see the creator at work. So I like to do video content if they're comfortable, whether it's like live drawing or just in their studio, looking at how they work and the processes. I think fans really appreciate that kind of behind the scenes look as well. But yeah, publicity have great contacts in the media as well. So they'll send the book out and pitch for interviews, extracts, Q&As. all the things that kind of get it out into the wider literary world as well.
One of the fan questions we had was, why should graphic novelists publish with traditional book publishers, sorry. I couldn't get my words out. Why should graphic novelists publish with traditional book publishers, do you think?
I think for me, you get to work with a team of people who are all behind the book, who have expertise in all the different stages. You get the opportunity to look at rights and going international to different publishers and translations. PR and marketing have the contacts for the people who can get you exposure. You get the expertise of people like Neil and design and art directing and really making the book look and feel the best it can be. The expertise for the printers and getting it printed in the right place with the right finishes. And then the sales team who have the contact with retailers, getting it into shops, getting it on display, making sure they're aware of it in good time and kind of promoting it in their online spaces and in store as well. So I think just having lots of people plugging for your book is always a good thing.
That said, some of the smaller comics publishers do a fantastic job as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you say, like it's, there needs to be more awareness and of graphic novels, and it's a surprisingly small marketplace, isn't it? Really for graphic novelists. So it's it's great to be able to get that out there and get the awareness and get more creators creating, I suppose.
Yeah.
So on that note, we've had a couple of general questions. One of them is about diversity and about persons of color graphic novelists being published. Is that something that you guys at Cape are actively working with? Is that something that you want to explore in the future of your line?
Yeah, it's a really big priority for us. The comics world hasn't always been as diverse as it should be, and it's something we're actively seeking to change. We're working actually closely with Thought Bubble and Black Lives Matter Leeds on an initiative which can hopefully be revealed soon. But we're looking also at internal practices, hiring people we work with in media and marketing contexts as well, and trying to be more inclusive. And yeah, I think more voices, more creators, that's a big priority for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about yourself, Sam? Is that something that you can speak to as well as an agent? Is that something you're actively looking for from creators?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, we've been looking for diverse voices for number of years. This isn't some new thing, but it's really sort of gathering steam, and we have all sorts of sort of schemes we're running at RCW. RCW itself prides itself on our diverse list of authors, but we can all we can all get better. We can all try harder. Look at this panel, all white.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a very good point. It's something that myself as a reader as well, like on the on a consumer level, it's something that all of us need to do more by going out of our way to support other creators of color and things like that. So it's definitely something on everyone's mind, more so at the moment than previously, but as you say, Sam, it's something that has always been an issue and is always something that should be rectified. But what's next for Cape then? What have you got in the future? What other books have you got coming out?
We've got quite a few books we're excited about. We have one more graphic novel coming out this year, which is an adaptation of a book that was originally not a graphic novel, a non-fiction book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Next year, we have a new graphic memoir from Alison Bechdel called The Secret to Superhuman Strength. It's the first graphic novel from Alison in nearly a decade, which is really exciting. And the year after that, we got some great news the other week. We're going to be publishing a graphic novel, again, non-fiction, by an American artist called Ben Passmore. And that's called Black Arms to Hold You Up. And it's going to be a graphic history of 6 Black activists going all the way from the early 20th century to the Black Lives Matter movement of today. Are there any others, Katrina, that you want to flag?
I think there's the main ones. We have something quite exciting coming early next year as well, but I'm not sure if we can talk about it yet. Keep your eyes open.
So watch this space.
Yeah.
And we've only got a few minutes left, but we've had a couple of general questions. One of them was Marvel versus DC. What's your preference? But I'd like to expand that a little bit to kind of ask each of you what comics do you what graphic novels do you read? What do you enjoy in your spare time?
I like to read quite widely. Like I really love Riyad Sattouf's Arab of the Future series. I am waiting for Saga to resume. I also enjoyed Paper Girls and Giant Days. They're really great. I like Marvel and DC both, but probably one of my favorite comic arcs is one that I think they're going to use for the next Thor film, which is Jason Aaron and Russell Dalton's Goddess of Thunder run.
Yes.
From Thor. And I also love anything by G. Willow Wilson and Kelly Sue DeConnick.
Brilliant. Anyone else?
Oh, I read something absolutely incredible only yesterday. A guy called David Biskup. I think he did it in conjunction with LCAF, the East London Comic and Zine Fair, I think and it's called Comic Art Fair, sorry, and it's called "There's Only One Place This Road Ever Ends Up," and it's a memoir about himself and his fiancée. Yeah, it's very, very, very good. I would heartily recommend that.
What's the author's name again? Sorry,
David Biskup, I think is how you say it.
how do you spell that?
Biskup. I think. So he does. I think he's an illustrator, more generally. Yeah, it's very good.
Daisy, Neil, Sam, any comics you'd like to recommend?
I particularly enjoyed this one, Berlin, City of Stones, which is a graphic history of the Weimar Republic, which might not turn everyone on, but I really enjoyed it. And it's the first of 3 volumes. So I've almost completed it and looking forward to the remainder.
Brilliant.
Katrina's background is a pretty good summary of the graphic novels I like to read in my free time. And of course, Matthew's is very prominent, rightly so. I also recently really loved a classic by Geoff Winterhart called Days of the Bagnalled Summer, which was made into a film as well.
Yeah.
Anything for you, Sam?
Well, I have to say the best graphic novel I've read recently is one not out until next year, and that's Stephen Collins' latest, and I think that's going to be huge.
Oh, fantastic. More teasers for things to come. I like that. Well, that's all we've got time for then. Thank you, everyone. This has been Demystifying the Publishing Process, Cape Graphic Novels panel. We hope we've done just that and helped to shine a light on the publishing process from start to finish. Thank you to Katrina, Daisy, Matthew, Sam and Neil. Thank you from me, Matt Lune. And thanks to Thought Bubble Digital Comic Con 2020 for hosting. And finally, thanks to you for joining us. Take care and we hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.